Hi, it's Nicole from Dogo Argentino, USA. Welcome to my channel. I'm super stoked you're here. In today's video, we are going to dive in the topic of neutering your Dogo Argentino. Now, many people believe that good, responsible Dogo Argentino ownership starts with neutering your dog. We are going to unpack that. We are going to talk about some of the common misconceptions, and I'm going to make a recommendation on a proper age to neuter if that is the choice that you feel is right for your Dogo Argentino, yourself, your family, and your particular circumstance. Don't take my word for it. I'm a woman wearing cat ears. You should look up some information as well as watch this video. Please be advised, I have studied over 50 veterinary reports to create this video. I'm going to link them down below in the description. So if you want to do further research, and I encourage you to do so, you can go straight to these papers and you can read the results for yourself, and then take the results of your own research through these reports, through this video, through forums, through the many different sources of information available to you, and go to your veterinarian, because I am not a veterinarian. It is important that you discuss it with a medical professional, and nothing I say should be taken as professional advice in a veterinary sense, because I am not a veterinarian. Okay, so why do people want to neuter their Dogo Argentino? I believe that many people choose to do so based primarily on peer pressure, because people tell you it's the right thing to do for the dog. People tell you it's the healthy thing to do for the dog. People tell you you will have a better experience and a better pet for castrating your Dogo Argentino. I think there is quite a lot of convention, there is habit, and there is misconception all rolled up into the general advice that good, responsible pet owners neuter their Dogo Argentino dogs. Where did this come from? Where did this idea come from? This is pretty much based in the 1970s, specifically in the United States. If you look at other places like Europe, they don't neuter their Dogo Argentino dogs. As a matter of fact, in some countries, such as Norway, it's illegal to neuter a dog without a specific veterinary reason, and you can't just do it to do it, because you will see in the course of this video why. Okay, so the studies that I looked at did not include specifically Dogo Argentino dogs. And so that is the first caveat that you need to know regarding this information. I studied several different veterinary reports that included German Shepherd dogs, Golden Retrievers, Labradors, Vizslas, and mixed breed dogs. Much of the data was pulled from a very long-term study using the Veterinary Medical Association database from 1964 until 2003. Some studies were quite large. There was a study that included 1,552 dogs. Again, they chose after that to do a second study with a larger pool. They chose 3,593 dogs. A further study added an additional 10,839 dogs, 10839. Those three studies alone covered 15,984 dogs. So these are not tiny studies. These are not studies of 6 dogs drawing conclusions. Now, not all studies are related to the Dogo Argentino, but I think that we can extrapolate based on the size of the dog. And so let's talk about some of the hoped for changes in behavior based on neutering. There is a belief that neutering will make your dog less excitable. There is a belief that neutering will make your dog less aggressive. There is a belief that neutering will make your dog easier to train. There is a belief that neutering the dog is going to save the dog in its sexual frustration. So let's talk about some of the behavioral changes that these studies have blown apart. I mean, just gone. Okay, so in this study that I just mentioned of the 15,984 dogs, there was a 31% increase in fearfulness, including fear biting. So that's 1 in 3. 1 in 3 neutered dogs was more likely to bite. There was a 33% increase in touch sensitivity. That comes into play when you are trying to collar a dog, when you're leading a dog on a leash, when the dog is being examined by a veterinarian, when a dog is having its nails cut or groomed. Touch sensitivity, huge increase, 1 in 3. And there was an 8% increase in excitability, meaning that neutering didn't calm the dog down at all, it actually amped the dog up. Now, there was a 42% increase in feeding when the case of the dog was being free-fed, meaning there was kibble down all the time. 42% of those dogs were going to eat more frequently. There was a marked improvement for urine marking. 68% improvement on urine marking. There was a 70% increase that was considered a marked increase in avoiding roaming. So if your dog is always scratching at the door, trying to escape, trying to go out into the wild, there was quite a lot of reduction of roaming. Now, one of the huge takeaways from these studies and from all the research that I've done, and like I said, I looked at over 50 sources, it seems as though the thing that struck me the most was that intact dogs tend to die of either trauma or infections. Neutered dogs die of cancer, and they also pass away of immune-related disorders. As a matter of fact, one of the studies, which was on golden retrievers, found that 60% of golden retrievers would die eventually of cancer. Now, one of the benefits of neutering is that it does increase longevity. Unfortunately, the studies did not conclude that the longevity increase, meaning that the dog lived longer, was based on the fact that the dog was neutered. There is something in statistics called correlation, and correlation isn't causation, meaning that just because two things happen to go up at the same level doesn't mean that item number 1 causes item number 2. Meaning that if you neuter your Dogo Argentino dog and it lives longer, it may not be because you neutered it. It may be because you have more finances to take that dog and get appropriate medical care. It may be that people that tend not to neuter don't have as much money, and they don't neuter because they don't have money, and therefore that dog tends to not have access to veterinary care. So do remember that causation and correlation are not the same thing, and that is important when looking at all these results. Just because something is there doesn't mean that the result is because it's there. In other words, just because you neuter doesn't mean that neutering is the reason that these things happen. But let's look at it. Okay. So the pros, let's talk about the pros, and there are pros of neutering your dog. Statistically, the dog is going to live longer. There is going to be a marked decrease in urine marking. There is going to be a marked decrease in roaming. There is sometimes a decrease in unwanted sexual behavior, like humping your leg, that kind of thing, but not always. Let's talk about some of the other things that are cons, and I think that these are important to talk about. If you choose to neuter your Dogo Argentino dog, if we are drawing upon the basis of research that I have looked at, you have a 42% increase in eating, which leads to an increase in obesity. There is up to a 5% increase in cranial cruciate ligament disease, CCL, and elbow dysplasia. There is an increase in hip dysplasia. There is a decrease in testicle tumors. That makes sense because there are no testicles. There is a decrease in perianal gland tumors. Those would be tumors around the butt of the dog. There is a 4 times increase in prostatic carcinoma, which is prostate cancer. There is a 3 times as much increase in lymphoma, which is a blood cancer. There is an increase hemangiosarcoma. Hemangiosarcoma is heart cancer. There is an increase in osteosarcoma or bone cancers of up to 4 times as much. There is an increase in transitional cell carcinoma, another type of cancer. There is a decrease, yay, finally, there's a decrease in benign hyperplasia. There is a decrease in perineal hernia. That makes sense. So that's pretty crazy, right? Pretty crazy. Behaviorally, if you have a 31% increase in fear-based aggression, and that is both fear from strangers, fear from owners, and fear for other dogs, you're going to get a lot more fear biting. If you have a 33% increase in touch sensitivity, it's going to be a lot harder to groom that dog's nails. If you have an 8% increase in excitability, that means that that dog is actually more wacko. And these are already really, really high energy dogs. They're very, very driven. They're stubborn. They're bright. And you can't out-exercise a Dogo Argentino. Those dogs, I don't care if you're a marathon runner, that dog can run with you the whole time like it's nothing and do it the next day. They are definitely very, very driven. So the studies, many of them looked at early neutering, so neutering before 1 year, what they would call late neutering, which would be neutering between 1 year and 2 years, and lots of them just looked over the life of the whole animal. Like the Golden Retriever study actually studied the Golden Retriever through the entire lifespan of the dog. It is my belief that the appropriate age, if you feel that you have to neuter, if you feel that you have to neuter, I truly believe you should not do it before 2 years old, because almost all of these cancers that have an uptick because of the fact that the dog is neutered are worsened the younger you do it. And perhaps to me, the most single frightening statistic of neutering, and this one was drawn from the study that was from 1964 until 2003, and it was pulled from the veterinary medical database. So this wasn't breed specific, this was all dogs. It included a terrifying 17% increase in hip dysplasia. Now, why is the hip dysplasia so over the top if you neuter? It's because of the hormones. The reproductive system of the Dogo Argentino releases hormones, and those hormones help to control bone growth. If you fix the dog prior to the skeleton being fully grown, which takes between 1.5 and 2 years in the Dogo Argentino dog, you are going to affect the way those bones are growing. And basically you have a long bone and a short bone. One of the bones stops growing at about 8 months. The second bone, the longer bone, tends to grow between 1.5 years and 2 years. If those two bones grow at the wrong rate, where they meet in the hip and at the feet doesn't align properly, which also accounts for the CCL, those cranial cruciate ligament disease, and also the elbow dysplasia. So basically they're more likely to receive that type of injury. And those types of injuries are extremely costly. They cause the dogs to suffer. And this is a dog that is at high risk for those types of injuries because these dogs run, right? They're hunting dogs. They're outside, they're loving life, they're in the woods, they're hiking with you, they're running with you, they're walking with you. These are not couch potato dogs. So the risk for having those types of problems are really, really high, because this isn't like a little tiny dog, let's just say a Boston Terrier who, sits on the couch a lot of the day. This is a dog that wants to be outdoors and wants to do athletic things. They love to run, they love to jump, they love to swim. And so they're at a huge risk for those things. Now, there are other things that affect hip dysplasia, and I do want to talk about that for just a minute. Hip dysplasia, in addition to neutering being a huge cause of hip dysplasia, especially early neutering, meaning neutering under 1 year, but even neutering between 12 months and 24 months is increased. And as we all know, hip dysplasia is a terrible problem in large breeds. So you want to make sure that you are reducing the likelihood that your dog get hip dysplasia. So there are some things that you can actually do which are lifestyle related that will help. Don't allow your dog to become obese. Obese dogs are more likely to develop musculoskeletal problems. Don't allow your dog to be kenneled for excessive periods of time. Dogs that are not properly exercised are more likely to develop problems. And that makes sense. If you confine a dog that's meant to run and jump and exercise and is a very large dog, and you kennel it for long periods of time, especially when it's growing up, it's sitting down most of the day. Because let's say you work a full-time job, as most of us do, you're gone for 8 hours. If that dog is in a kennel for 6 to 8 hours, it's not going to have full range of motion because it's kenneled, and that will lead to things like hip dysplasia. Other things that lead to hip dysplasia include jumping in and out of trucks, because it's incredibly hard impact. If you got an SUV and you have your Dogo Argentino jump out of the back, yes, they can do it. They're hugely athletic dogs, but you are having a very intense impact over a very hard surface generally, because most of us are parking our SUVs on pavement. It's rare that they're on dirt, although there are certainly people in the country that do that. So you're having this intense impact over and over where the dog is taking that shot, jumping out of the SUV. So I encourage you not to allow your dogs before 2 to do a lot of jumping in and out of the SUV. If they're going into a sedan where it's just one step up and they're not really hitting hard and they don't have that rough impact, I think that that's better. Or you can always get stairs or ramps for your SUV or your pickup trucks. But do know, or you can choose not to do any of those things, but do know that you are increasing the likelihood of hip dysplasia if you kennel excessively, if you neuter, if you allow the dog to be obese, if you don't take proper exercise with the dog and the dog's in poor condition physically. So let's talk about the improvement in roaming. Roaming means that the dog is driven to go find a mate, and it's looking around and looking for a way to escape its immediate environment so it can go find a mate, because that biological drive is very strong. I think that it is a concern, and one of the ways that you can mitigate that concern is lifestyle related. For example, literally, if you're going to open the door to get pizza, maybe you have that dog on a leash and you're holding the dog, or the leash is tethered to the banister of the stairwell, or maybe you shut the dog temporarily in the bathroom and go get the pizza and open the dog. There's ways to manage opening your front door without having a dog bolt. So you can manage and contain roaming. You want to make sure one of the biggest things I think with dog behavior with the Dogo Argentino is that you don't take things for granted. Don't assume that your gardener shut the door or the gate to your fence. Go look before you let the dog out. Don't assume that your children have a hold of the dog. You have a hold of the dog. There's a lot of management kind of stuff that you can reduce roaming problems based on management. In terms of the improvement in urine marking, it makes sense that that would be improved because, of course, the dog is not trying to leave his calling card everywhere going, hey, I'm a stud about town. You should give me a call if you're in heat. Obviously, that's awesome. Do realize that it is natural for a dog to mark. It's part of their heritage, it's part of their genetics, but you can definitely fix those problems, and I fixed them, and my dogs are all intact or all unaltered. and all of my dogs are normal and fertile, and I just do the things I need to do to make sure that those dogs are separated. So I think that overall, it is my personal opinion, feel free to disagree with me, that it is actually not necessary nor desirable to neuter your Dogo Argentino dog at all. I think personally that neutering is just not necessary, and the risks are so much higher for certain types of cancer like bone cancer and heart cancer and blood cancer, and injuries based on hip dysplasia, and injuries based on elbow dysplasia, and injuries based on CCL. I just really don't believe in neutering. I'm going to say it, I'm putting it out there. I don't believe in neutering. I think that you should be, I think that the promise, the golden promise, which is, as it turns out, a myth, is that the dog is going to be an easier pet to have. He's going to be less aggressive. He's going to have less sexual frustration, that these are going to be things. And the problem with statistics is that statistics looks over a large group and draws conclusions, and that can be helpful, such as when they did the Golden Retriever study and they determined that 6 out of 10 Golden Retrievers were going to die of cancer. They need to look at that. A, it gives them a great thing to study as to why the genetics of the Golden Retriever are predisposing it to cancer, and B, it lets you plan appropriately that the average lifespan of a Golden Retriever who died of cancer was under 7 years old. So, you know, I guess it's preparing you for heartbreak. Now, that doesn't mean that your Golden Retriever is going to get cancer. It doesn't mean that, but you can draw broad conclusions. My personal belief, my personal broad conclusion is that neutering is not necessary, and I really don't believe in it. My dogs are going out of the world the way they came in the world. I did not expect to get some sort of benefit in training or aggression or anything from neutering the dog. And I think that that's really the main, besides convention, besides peer pressure, besides people just telling you blindly, neuter the dog. I think that people think, oh, this is going to make the dog easier to have in my life. And if you are convenience oriented in that way, I doubt that this is the breed for you, because Dogo Argentinos are anything but convenient. They are going to require certain things of you in order to be a good companion dog. And if you're willing to meet those needs, this will be bar none the best dog you've ever had. They are affectionate, they are loyal, they're strong, they're protective, they're intelligent as the day is long. They are fantastic dogs for the right person. And I think that if you are really, really attracted to the look of this dog, but you're not attracted to some of the breed-based genetic behaviors of this dog, then it's probably not the right dog for you. If you're willing to exercise your dog, then you can have a great dog. If you're, you know, gone a lot and you don't exercise all that much and you don't want to spend long periods of your free time working with your dog, then maybe this isn't the right dog. Maybe you need a dog that's less driven, because this is a really, really driven hunting dog. So that's just my opinion. You do not have to take my opinion as gold. Please do some research, look at some of these studies, look at some other videos, read some other information. But if you're asking my personal professional opinion, I don't believe that neutering assists your dog. I think what assists your dog in terms of reducing aggression is socialization, early, often, and ongoing. Obedience training, early, often, and ongoing. Vigorous daily exercise, ongoing forever. So if you're willing to do those things, I don't think that the mitigation of marking and roaming is worth the increase of hip dysplasia of 17% and cancers, a host of cancers between 3 and 5% more likely to get that cancer. For me, that's not worth it. Now, if you think that neutering is right for you, you should do it. It's your dog and it's your life, and you're the one who will deal with the consequences of those behaviors. And you could get lucky. I mean, it's still a relatively low risk to have, a bone cancer. It's a 4% greater likelihood. Is it greater? It is, but 4% is still relatively low. So, you know, bear in mind that if you're like, wow, it's 3 times more likely to get a blood cancer, or it's, 4 times more likely to get prostate cancer. It's, up to 5 times more likely to get CCL disease, the ligament disease. These are still relatively small. So you might think, hey, neutering is for me. You get to make that decision. Let me know what you think. One thing I would like to point out, that a lot of people get a dog neutered and they're like, oh, I have these benefits of the dog neutered, but they never really got to see the dog unneutered, because once you neuter it, it's obviously not unneutered. So if you, just as an example, let's say you neuter your dog at 9 months old and your dog never reaches full sexual maturity because it was too young, you don't have another dog to compare to be like, oh, this is what my dog would have been like had I not neutered it, but it is neutered, so this is what I get from that, and this is what you can't eat your sandwich and have your sandwich, you can't eat your cake and have your cake, hence the phrase, you can't eat your cake and have it too. So I think a lot of people are like, oh, this is awesome, and they're assigning the benefits and behavior to neutering when they don't have any real measure to compare to, because generally people who neuter all their animals. They desex all their animals or sterilize all their animals. And I think that, I would rather see someone sterilize a Dogo Argentino than give up a Dogo Argentino. So if you are having a rough time with it and you feel, after speaking to your veterinarian, looking at the research, that neutering is for you and that is going to keep that dog in its home of origin, then I would much rather see that than have you surrender the dog. So, I would much rather you keep your dog than give up your dog, of course. So I really appreciate you joining me. I want to hear all your thoughts, whether you neutered your dog, what age you neutered your dog, and most importantly, the thing that I am most curious about, did your vet inform you, if you neutered your Dogo Argentino, that there was an increased likelihood of hip dysplasia or many different types of cancers, or if they just said there was no risk? Because I think, it is my opinion, that the majority of vets out there are not going to tell you that there is a risk, because many people are of the belief that neutering is the only thing to do. So leave me a little comment. Let me know whether or not you neutered, and if you did so, whether your vet told you that there was a risk in doing so. Hey, as always, thank you for joining me. Please like, comment, share, and the best thing you can do for your Dogo, hit that bell for notifications so that you are informed every time I release a new video on Dogo Argentino USA. I hope you and your dog have a Dogo-tastic day. Thank you for joining me.